A Sailor's War by Sam Lombard-Hobson, with a foreword by Anne Monsarrat. Foreword. When Sam Lombard-Hobson came to visit us in Gozo some years ago and told my husband that he was being urged to write a book about his naval experiences, Nicholas said, "Get on with it, my boy." It was something of a reversal of roles. In the war years, it had been Sam who had given the orders. "Right, number one, carry on." Nicholas himself should, of course, be writing this forward, but, sadly, he was not to live long enough to see even Sam's first draft. However, he spoke so often with such gratitude and admiration of his long-term friend and one-time commanding officer that I think I know what he would have liked to have said had he had the chance. At the beginning of the last war, Nicholas was a pacifist with a mistrust of pretty well everyone in authority. When he decided that pacifism was pointless in the face of tyranny and joined the Royal Navy Voluntary Reserve by answering an advertisement in the Times for gentlemen with yachting experience, he was not lucky in his first captain. In the cruel sea, he gave to the appalling Bennett some of the crudeness and brutality with which he felt he had been treated as a novice, hostilities only, junior officer. His second captain could scarcely have been a greater contrast. Sam remembers being somewhat less than benignant to his new first lieutenant when he first joined the ship, the Corvette HMS Guillemot, but no memory of that apparently heartless welcome ever clouded Nicholas's recollections. He remembered the wartime Sam, 3 years his junior, but already old in seafaring knowledge and experience, as a tall, elegant, austere, immensely efficient, scrupulously fair, totally self-disciplined model of command, and his ship as the best kept, best drilled, best behaved corvette in the Harwich flotilla, if not the whole fleet. A career officer devoted to the Navy, this new captain was obviously disposed to pass on both his pride in the service and his expertise, and more endearing still, show that he considered even humble members of the RNVR to be capable of absorbing both. When they first met, Nicholas was 31, author of 3 bad novels and 1 good one, veteran of 2 years of Atlantic convoys, 1,000 miles out, 1,000 miles back, in slamming icy seas, or a silken calm which lured out the lurking covens of killer U-boats. He was later to command a corvette and then a frigate of his own. But it was his 8 months on Guillemot with Sam Lombard-Hobson which, he said, taught him more than he learned during all the other 6 years of the war, and which left him knowing, at last, what the Royal Navy was all about. Together they shared many of the experiences which were later to feature in The Cruel Sea, including the most horrendous one of all, the decision as to whether to save the waving, bobbing, confident of rescue survivors from a torpedoed sister ship, or to hunt the still prowling enemy which, if left free, could sink, kill, maim hundreds, possibly thousands more. Mentor and grateful pupil parted in July 1942, when Sam went off to captain a Hunter-class destroyer, and Nicholas, on Sam's recommendation, was given his own corvette command. When he left Harwich, Nicholas bore him with one prized, purloined trophy, Sam's personal rubber stamp proclaiming Lieutenant in Command, together with his new store of legitimately earned knowledge. From Sam, he was to write in his autobiography, he had learned how to run a ship, how to handle her in any weather, how to get the best out of tired men, including his own tired self, how to deal with defaulters and talk to valued petty officers, how even to walk up and down the quarterdeck in private contemplation. It was to be 10 years before their next shipboard meeting, a chance encounter in South Africa where Sam, visiting Simonstown in his latest destroyer, HMS Jutland, invited his civvy-suited, briefcase-carrying former first lieutenant to sea with him for night-time manoeuvres and a view of the new, highly technical peacetime Navy. After that night of reminiscence and shared sea time, Sam, with mischievous relish, had Nicholas transferred to the aircraft carrier HMS Vengeance by boatswain's chair, a stomach-churning operation, both ships steaming at 20 knots, the newly best-selling author/diplomat slung between them in a waist-high canvas bucket, and Sam, with a loud head on the bridge, calling out, "Good luck, number one!" After that little high-wire ballet, Nicholas was content to let Sam brief him on naval developments on solid land. I'm not sure that Nicholas knew that his most admired, most scrupulous of captains had, like himself, broken regulations by keeping a wartime diary, but I do know that he would have approved of the use to which it was now being put. Despite the horrors, the appalling cruelty, and waste of war at sea, which were to return to haunt him at the end, Nicholas never lost his love for the Navy. He would have been delighted to know that the man who first taught him to admire has now written his own tribute to the service. Anne Monsarrat, Gozo, September 1982. Preface. In 1951, there was launched upon the world a book which has sold more copies in hardback than any other novel in the English language. On the 31st of August 1971, I was greatly honoured to receive a leather-bound copy of the 20th anniversary edition of The Cruel Sea, signed by the author. Nicholas Monsarrat and I served together during the war in the Corvette Aegean from November 1941 until July of the following year. On long convoy trips, when nothing much was happening, we used to spend hours on the bridge airing our different views on life at sea. It was on these occasions that the first seeds were sown of the great book that was to make my first lieutenant immortal. In after years, when my wife and I were visiting the Monsarrats at their blissful home on the island of Gozo, I chanced to tell Nicholas that naval contemporaries of mine were bullying me to put on record my varied experiences before they were lost to memory. "Why not?" he said. "You've got a far better story to tell about the sea than I ever had. Have a go." I roared with laughter, and told him that I would never dare to trespass on the sacred ground of others far more erudite than me. Anyhow, I was far too busy doing other things. A little later, I was again confronted. "For God's sake, get on with it. I'll help you," urged my one-time number one. Sadly, we were never to argue the toss again. Nicholas Monsarrat died in King Edward VII Hospital, London, in June 1979. As a gesture of affection and respect for my old friend and shipmate, I now accept his advice to have a go and get on with the job. I once read in a letter to the editor of the Times the definition of a gentleman. Someone who is never rude unintentionally, implying that to be so, in ignorance or by default, is a crime under the regulations governing the code of conduct of the upper echelons of society. In the pages which follow, I shall be offending the susceptibilities of many purists of naval ethics by frequent omission of the prefix HMS or that permitted definite article when referring to a warship. I hope that this breach of correct procedure will not cause undue distress amongst my naval readers. I only err with full intent for the benefit of laymen in the interest of grammar and ease of reading. I would never make this mistake intentionally or unintentionally in an official document. I also occasionally follow the ancient custom of referring to a commanding officer by name of ship, which usage owes its origins to our seagoing ancestors, and invariably confounds the landlubber on hearing it for the first time. For example, when the Duke of Edinburgh commanded the frigate Magpie in the Mediterranean, he was addressed by those senior to him in naval rank simply as Magpie, and not your Royal Highness. Similarly, when the Prince of Wales was commanding a minehunter, he became plain Bronnington to his naval superiors. Readers of this half-time autobiography will notice early on that I changed my surname. My father was born Lombard, but in middle age, under Irish laws of inheritance, he had to take the additional name of Hobson. Not wishing to be burdened with a double name, he promptly dropped the former and kept the latter. I was born a Lombard, and soon followed my father's example and changed to plain Hobson, thus avoiding the bullying that was the lot of a new boy bringing a double name with him to school in those days. On the death of my father, when I was still a minor, I was persuaded by my Lombard relations to resume the family name, but Irish legislation prevented me dropping the Hobson. Since that day, I have endured the not inconsiderable inconvenience of a double-barreled name, with very little material gain in compensation. At least, unlike Admiral the Honourable Sir Reginald Plunkett, Earl Drax, I did not have as many as 3 antecedents leave me a cabbage patch on Irish soil. On the Admiral hauling down his flag to return home after serving as Commander-in-Chief, America and West Indies Station, a witty staff officer with an Masonic touch signalled from Bermuda, Admiral Drax, with the frigates Plunkett, Erne, and L, sailed this morning for Europe. Chapter 1. Training. I was born the year before the outbreak of the First World War. My father lived his life during the long period of Pax Britannica, and was never required to take up arms in the service of his country or the Empire, being too old to fight in the Kaiser's War. Nor do the family records show any forebear of my father's as having had to carry a weapon, except in the pursuit of game, and no male of his name ever went to sea, other than for reasons of pleasure. My mother, born at Daubeny, was able to produce a lineage which showed an ancestor, one Philip de Aubigny, counsellor to King John at the signing of Magna Carta, and tutor to the young King Henry III, who, as a crusader, went overseas to fight in the Wars of the Cross. He died in 1292, and his tomb still lies undisturbed at the south transept entrance to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. With this one exception, no antecedent of mine fought in any war, military, civil, or holy, went to sea for conquest, or in defence of the realm. I can thus claim to have been born of non-aggressive stock, and without salt water in my veins. In 1921, at the age of 8, I went to Sunningdale School in Berkshire, then, as now, considered one of the best private schools in the country, where every pupil received a first-class classical education and was groomed specifically for Eton, hopefully with a scholarship. But I was not of that ilk, and must have been a disappointment, both to my parents and my tutors. The headmaster, however, had the measure of me. On the grounds that I was cut out for the Navy, he urged my father, "Send the boy to sea, not into the city." In after years I asked my father why the head had picked me out for a life at sea, and was told that I had succeeded in carving my initials higher up in the rafters of the gymnasium than anyone before me, and that I was the first boy to have won the school swimming cup while still a junior. Thus equipped with a supposedly good head for heights and amphibian inclination, I braced myself for the sea, with neither a thought for the city or life as a country gentleman. As I turned to say goodbye to my first school, to go henceforth to be trained in the profession of arms, I might have paused to think what the future held for the others who were leaving at that time to take up non-military careers. Today, the war memorial in the school chapel testifies that every boy who left Sunningdale with me in 1926 to take up a civilian career was killed in action during the Second World War. My training started at the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth. I can think of no place that could cut a spoilt boy down to size more quickly, yet graciously, than the imposing establishment high on the hill, overlooking the River Dart and the English Channel beyond. You arrived on your first day at the college, dressed in the uniform of a naval officer, and feeling quite pleased with yourself. A very senior and bemedalled Chief Petty Officer met you, and addressed you as Cadet, Sir. At the flagstaff overhead, the white ensign was flying proudly, and carved in 3-foot lettering across the stone frontage of the college was King Charles II's preamble to the Articles of War. It is upon the Navy, under the providence of God, that the safety, honour, and welfare of this realm do chiefly depend. As a member of the senior service, you are now charged to take your appointed place in acceptance of this daunting responsibility. But the splendour of your newfound position and its pleasing prospect was short-lived. You are allowed the traditional 24 hours to sling your hammock, as it is called, and then the Navy took you over. The 50-odd newly joined cadets were placed in a term, named after a famous admiral. Ours was the Exmouth term. You messed communally with the other 10 terms, but each term of cadets lived in its own gunroom, junior officers' quarters, which was theirs alone. No cadet from another term was allowed to enter it. All of you, aged 13 and a half years, thus went through the 4 years at the college in a strictly segregated manner. You had to salute every commissioned officer and master that you passed. During working hours, you had to move everywhere at the double, and, to pass another gunroom senior to yours as a mark of respect, you had to break into a double, whatever time of day. You were not allowed to speak to a cadet from a senior term without first being addressed by him. Infringement of any of these so-called guff, or disrespect of a superior, rules qualified you for a tick, a warning. 3 ticks resulted in your being turned out of bed after lights and receiving cuts with a cane from the term cadet captain. In the first 3 weeks you were belted round the parade ground each morning by a loud-voiced gunner's mate to get the swank out of you, as they were pleased to call it. No respite was given. The reveille on the bugle was a signal to turn out, go through a cold plunge, summer or winter, and dress all in the space of 10 minutes. After morning parade in all weathers, studies were held. College was cleared after the lunch hour, and every cadet had to take some form of exercise. This could be an organised game of football or cricket, a run with the Britannia Beagles, or a recognised log, meaning 2 hours on the river, or in the squash or tennis courts, or a cross-country run. Study was continued in the afternoon and after supper, until pipe down ordered cadets to their dormitories. If you were quick off the mark, and good with your elbows, you might squeeze in a bath before commander's rounds. By this time, every cadet had to have his sea chest properly laid out for inspection. Socks, with toes facing east, had to be laid across folded vests. Combs had to be placed on upturned hairbrushes in a north and south direction, and toothbrushes, with bristles facing west, had to be displayed on top of mugs. The penalty for anyone not exactly conforming with this drill was to turn out, dress into No. 1 uniform, report to the cadet captain, and be back in bed with the chest laid out correctly, all within 5 minutes. Failure to do this resulted in the defaulter being awarded a tick towards a subsequent beating. The other side of the Dartmouth coin, namely the fun time, was an idyllic existence for any boy. There were outlets for interest and pleasure not to be found at other schools. For example, the River Dart provided opportunities for cadets to take out boats, ranging from dinghies and waders to cutters and powerboats, to the round-the-world ketch and marillis. You were encouraged to mess about in boats, to make mistakes, to break down, to run aground, to fall overboard, and there was a duty steam pinnace always in readiness to come to your rescue. No questions were asked. By this means, it was expected that officers of the future would get out of their system all the silly things normally done by boys afloat for the first time, so that when they went to sea as midshipmen in charge of fast picket boats, they would have confidence in themselves and never make mistakes. Dartmouth Harbour was always full of shipping of some kind or other, and, by making friends with a deckhand of whatever nationality, you would be allowed to explore at will. Every merchant ship to visit the place knew that the boys dressed in blue shorts and blazers and wishing to come aboard were the future officers of the fleet, which would protect them in time of war. I greatly enjoyed my time at Dartmouth. It was a not too academic, extremely active kind of life that suited me. 4 years of training, however, was enough. At the age of 17, I was glad to go to sea and put into practice all that I had learned.